Kia ora, talofa, namaste, haere mai, and welcome to this week's episode of the Niche Cast. We have an almighty NRL Grand Final preview for you from the Aotearoa Kiwi-NRL perspective. Also got a new football Ferns squad. We've got some National League grassroots football as well. We might discuss the shifting sands wildcard of Aotearoa's boxing landscape and the combat sports realm. Just as a warm-up, a swing a leg, swing an arm, a couple of yoga poses just to get the blood flowing. A key narrative from the NRL Grand Final was Northland's presence. Dylan Brown for the Eels, you got James Fisher-Harris with the Panthers, both of whom I've labelled as some of the best bits of Kiwi NRL recruitment ever. And there is a greater Northland yarn with the Panthers that I'll explore later on in the podcast as well. I wrote about that this morning. I'm curious because cricket, off the top of my head, it's all about Wellington. Like, there's fantastic young talent from around Aotearoa, but Wellington has the best concentration of cricketing talent based on, like, you can just start with the fact that Sophie Devine, Amelia Kerr, Jess Kerr come from the same neighbourhood. And then you can expand out to all sorts of other players and some of the best young talent in Aotearoa. We recently had all whites football, got a football Ferns squad as well. So I am curious, like, what's a hot region of Aotearoa footballing talent right now? When I usually ask you this question, you revert back to the Ole Academy, like some basic Wellington type of shit. But I'm curious, is there a region that is producing players to go to those academies, or is there another region that has just come into the forefront of Aotearoa football in recent months for you?
Yeah, that's the key point. What you said about the two academies there, because Wellington is it is the hub because Ole Academy and Wellington Phoenix have produced the majority of all whites in the last few years, and now that there's a Welly Next women's team as well, that's also shifted the focus there to some extent anyway. But the thing is, the Wellington Phoenix, like that inaugural Wahine squad, didn't actually have anyone from Wellington. They may have technically been the Wellington Phoenix, but the players were signed from, a couple from Canterbury, quite a few from Auckland, couple from Central Region actually. No one from Wellington is just curious one there. So I won't say Wellington because I'll step back a little bit further. It's not strictly the same thing as what you're asking about, like the hub, but the region that I've been thinking about the most has been the Waikato region, because of the way that the national leagues have changed to this club-based thing, and the Waikato teams, the top Waikato teams, play in the Auckland leagues, the Northern Regional Football Leagues and the Northern League, and that's pretty tough up against all the big Auckland clubs. It kind of squeezes them out of that a little bit. Melville did qualify for the men's thing, so they are flying the flag for the White Bop region, which is great to see. One of only two teams of the club teams that have qualified that aren't from the three main regions of Canterbury, Wellington, and Auckland. Napier City Rovers also got in there. Also the lowest ranked qualifier from the Central League. So, but I mean, they got in there. That's the important thing. So Melville are flying the flag. That's important. We have had Hamilton Wanderers in there for the last few years. Nothing on the women's side for Auckland teams qualifying from there. But when you look a little bit deeper, it's like, you look at the YBOP squad for the last squad that they had in the Women's League a couple of years ago. You had players like Michaela Foster, Chelsea Elliott. I think Kate Loy might have played for them that year. She's certainly from the region. Mania Elliott. Like, there's Amy Feinberg-Daniele as well was in that sort of range. Like, there may not be a Waikato team in the Women's League, but there are a lot of Waikato players spread out around. And then if you look at sort of like the international regions, I mean, Liv Chance is from Tauranga, so spreading it out to the Bay of Plenty. Rebecca Stott was born in Papamoa, right next door. So she grew up in Melbourne, but, she was born in Papamoa. Ryan Thomas is from Te Puke. Chris Wood spent the majority of childhood in Hamilton. Maka Rojas is from that region as well. There's plenty more where that came from too. You could list a few others. Like, it's a region that sort of gets stuck in between a little bit. It's kind of gets squeezed out a little bit as well, but you're still seeing quite a few like top level footballers coming from those regions as well. So it's probably, in answering your question, it's probably what I've been thinking about the most.
It's interesting because I think it might have been on the Monday email dispatch, I highlighted a bit of a trend in the 3 players who left rugby union to join the wider NRL mixer. They are all from the central region of the North Island. So you got Gail Broughton, Wahine 7-star gold medalist, I think it was at the Tokyo Games. She's from Hawera, which is obviously on the west coast, New Plymouth, Taranaki region. Will Warbrick, I think he won a silver medal at the Tokyo Olympics. He joined the Melbourne Storm. Gail Broughton, she's in the NRL Women's Final for the Parramatta Eels. Shout out to her. And then you've got Will Warbrick. He's from Korero, which I believe is Bay of Plenty. And he joined the Melbourne Storm, but didn't play for the Storm. He just played for Sunshine Coast Falcons in Q Cup. And then Valence Tafare. He is genuinely from Waikato. I think he's actually from Hamilton. He's a Fraser Tech Rugby Union junior. And he is signed to the Redcliffe Dolphins, and he was an absolute monster for the Redcliffe Dolphins this season. So all 3 players who moved from rugby union to join either an NRL club or a future NRL club or NRL Women's Club, they're all from the central region of the North Island. So there's good crossover there with your note. And that note was part of the Monday email dispatch. Shout out to the email banger. Find that on Substack, thenishecase.substack.com. We send out that email newsletter with all the links to our content, as well as links to the podcast, as well as extra yarns. So you might find the National League Women's Team of the Week. There you go. That the Wildcard drops every Monday. Wildcard is endless football notes and other funky Aotearoa sporting pockets as well. You might find some cricket in my dispatch. You might find some deep cut rugby league notes, as well as every Monday seems to be like a Lydia Ko celebration, because she is the beast. She's a fucking monster on the LPGA tour. Shout out Lydia Ko, and shout out to everyone who has signed up to our email dispatch, thenishecase.substack.com, every Monday and Friday evening. Big up to the Patreon whānau as well. Patreon.com/ELNicheCase, our niche case. Every Tuesday morning, we record a Patreon podcast. This week, we broke down the All Whites and the Socceroos and some of that stuff. So big up to the Patreon whānau for supporting the Niche Case every month. Very generous of yourselves, and we appreciate it greatly. Patreon is the best way to support us straight up the guts. Patreon.com/our niche case. And for the time being, there is an extra podcast there every week for your Aotearoa sporting fix. We are from the Niche Cachet. We do love a bit of Kai Wildcard, and as you've referenced before, do love a bit of quiche. So we are the Niche Quiche. Nothing wrong with a good old quiche. I do love a quiche. So I don't mind niche quiche. It goes hard. So shout out to our website, theniche-quiche.com. Not spelt quiche, spelt cachet. Important, or else you'll be Googling images of Aotearoa quiche, which is fine. But we're from the Niche Case, theniche-case.com, Wildcard. We start with mindfulness. What do you got?
Yeah, well, I've been whipping through my copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, and whipping open to a page on book 10 where there are actually 2 quotes. I wasn't sure which one to pick, and so I thought, well, I'll just read them both, because they've you can pick whichever one counts as the official mindfulness for today. The first one says, stop talking about what the good man is like and just be one. The second one goes, each of us needs what nature gives us when nature gives it. So I'm not sure if you want to respond to both or either, but there's a double banger of mindfulness here.
First one is just like mana. What is your mana? And this is a good way for, I think, for the modern Kiwi to really grow with some mindfulness, is apply it to Aotearoa ideals. And you got mana. So instead of chatting up the man you want to be, instead of chatting up the woman you want to be, and just the person that you're going to be, and I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, you just be it. You just be a good person. You use your manners. You help people out. And this is another thing, because I was listening to this with the bit of NBA Media Day. You talked about Stephen Adams at Media Day. On my perusal of NBA podcast, Brian Windhorst always makes clear you should watch what the players do as opposed to what they say. And this goes for everyone else as well. Like, you can talk whatever jibber jabber you want, but mana is based on actions. And instead of talking
Actions
about,
speak louder than words, basically.
essentially, yes. And what was the other one? Nature. So what do I like to say about nature or wildcard? I think I've mentioned this in a few emails, a few different mindfulness pockets as well. Nature is
You want me to finish the sentence?
Yeah,
Nature
please.
is. There's many words beginning with "re" that could
But
be. Nature is redeeming. Nature is refreshing.
close.
What's the word for? I know what you're thinking of. I just can't think of what the word is when it like refreshing. It makes itself over again. I don't know. Buzz.
My favorite
Can I
saying
phone a
is
friend?
the reliability of nature is soothing. So nature is reliable. Every day,
Okay, reliable. As
nature appears. Every day the sun rises. Every year the seasons come around at the same time. You can rely on nature, and nature's just beautiful. So I've actually forgot what that second mindfulness was now.
I put the book down and lost the page, but it said like nature, nature gives each of us what we need and when we need it, or something like that.
Which
each of us needs what nature gives us when nature gives it.
Perfect. Reliable nature. It always gives you what you need when you need it, and you don't need to get into the human ideas of I need to do this, I need to do that, or I want to do this, I want to do that. Nature just gives you what you need when you need it. So you don't need to go out and make it. You don't need to go out and exude all this yang energy. You can just trust the reliability in nature, because the reliability in nature is soothing. That's my favorite line.
The timeline of nature as well. Like not work into your calendar, not trying to preempt things and say this should happen now rather than a few, like, you know, the blossoms will bloom when they're supposed to, kind of thing. Like when the weather tells them that that's the right time, when their various cycles say this is the right time, the animals within the ecosystem and whatever, like all of this works to a it's not a strict like second by second set your watch to it kind of timeline, but it happens when it's supposed to happen. And I think it's probably soothing's another good word, like that, because this is again your reliability of nature kind of thing. It is a soothing thing to sort of give yourself to that timeline rather than trying to like plan everything out yourself and say this should happen now, this is when this should happen, this is when that should happen. Just being like, it'll happen when it's supposed to happen, and I will align myself with that external thing, rather than, which once you do that, it's no longer external as well, which is a whole other mindfulness idea. But rather than trying to plan everything out, it's just like, let things happen as they're supposed to happen, and trusting that as well. Trust is a big part of this whole thing.
If you can't trust nature, I don't know who the fuck you're going to trust. Wildcard. White Ferns lost the first T20 international of their series against West Indies. White Ferns won the ODI series. I think it was 2-1. The West Indies did the White Ferns classic and winning the third game after the series was already decided. Decent. Well, they lost, so it's not a decent loss, but it was a close loss. I think White Ferns, what I'm learning about White Ferns wildcard is they should sit a notch ahead of West Indies and then slightly below the best teams in the world. So I do believe the White Ferns should roll through this series and win the T20 series. It's hard to come up with conclusions from like a mid-series perspective. And based on this game, like I'm a I find it a bit weird that the White Ferns aren't really embracing the power of spin in the Caribbean. Like, you've got three serious spinners in Amelia Kerr, Fran Jonas, and Eden Carson. Jonas and Kerr are getting picked quite a lot right now, which is fine. But I think Eden Carson in these conditions is a better bowling option than the seamer, which takes us into some Aotearoa cricket stuff where now we need to have these seam bowlers because they're seamers. Sometimes your spinners are better bowlers than your seamers. And I think the White Ferns, a low-key strength of their squad right now is they've got three very good spinners, and I'd just like to see them play together more. But then Hannah Rowe was banging boundaries down the order to make this a close contest. So it's like, she's a seamer, but if you take her out for Eden Carson, you don't have that batting situation down the order, which the Black Caps and White Ferns also love as well, even to the extent where Susie Bates is bowling spin right now. She's not bowling much, but she's bowling spin because the conditions are suitable for that. So that's just one thing to look out for with the White Ferns as well. The ODI series, Lauren Down scored runs, which was good because she's a role-playing batter in that batting lineup, and that's what the White Ferns need. She dropped out. Oh, she was in the T20 team, but Georgia Plummer was promoted up to third batting slot, which is good little exposure for Georgia Plummer. Supremely talented batter, just hasn't had the opportunities in the White Ferns yet. I'd say Georgia Plummer is one of the best batting talents in Aotearoa right now in that younger age bracket. So she should get a lot of game time moving forward. But we'll keep track of the series. I'll drop some stats in the email tomorrow as well. That series is ongoing. White Ferns have lost the first game of the T20 International Series. Any quick thoughts on that wildcard before we shuffle along?
Well, Amelia Kerr got 3 wickets this morning, which is nice. But it came when the game where she missed out with the bat. But it's one of those things as well where I think Sophie Devine got 20 odd, but Bates didn't score any runs and Kerr didn't score any runs. And when none of the big three with the bat go like 40 plus, probably 50 plus, the White Ferns tend to lose. Like, I'd be interested to go back through all the results and see what the actual numbers are, like what their results are when one of them scores 50 plus, when two of them score 50 plus, when none of them score 50 plus, because I'd imagine it's very, very, very correlated with the like outcomes of those games. And here was one where between them they scored about 40 odd runs or something like that, and the White Ferns lost. And if they'd scored 42 runs between each other, they would have won, because they only lost by 1 run in the end, although it was a bit of a like tail order slogs kind of thing to get back in contention from a difficult spot.
Well, they only scored 30 runs, so
30 runs. So that's only, yeah. Well, I mean, that's the difference between a slog being caught on the boundary and a slog bouncing, like going through someone's hands and bouncing away for 4. Like those are some close margins there, but. Yeah, I thought the same thing as you about the spin. Like, why don't you just pick 3 spinners at every point during this tour and the Black Caps tour of West Indies before it, just a couple months ago? Whenever they lean into spin, they just do better. It seems to like the spinners in general had just been more successful. It is interesting to see Susie Bates bowling again, though, isn't it? Because I don't know that she'd bowled at the international level since she had, was it a back injury? Whatever it was, where she was out for quite a while. Yeah. Couple overs every game, I think. It's not a heavy bowling workload, but she's getting a couple overs in, which is nice. It's another option. It's always what you need. But yeah, it probably is one of those ones where it's like, we'll see how they go in the next couple T20s, because obviously that game could have gone either way, and the White Ferns did win the ODI series. They should be confident about being able to win the next couple T20s and turn things around. So if they come away from the West Indies with 2-2-1 series victories, I assume it's a 3 T20 series. 5. Oh, there we go. Well, even more time to turn it around then. So they're not even in must-win territory yet. So yeah, if they can come away with a couple series wins there, then there's nothing to complain about, really. It's just all part of the process of ironing things out and becoming a consistent team. they're in an all right place. They seem to be performing decently against the kind of team where they're even away from home. If they play well, they can beat a team like the West Indies. So it's probably a good opponent for them to be playing at this stage of their sort of, it's not a rebuild, but it is a little bit of a recalibration since a disappointing World Cup.
Everything you said about the batting is why it's so interesting which other batters step up. Lauren Downs stood up in the ODI series, and she is a very talented young, not young, she's about 27, 28, but like her and Maddie Green are pretty, make for a pretty interesting comparison, because Maddie Green's been in the White Ferns much longer. They're a similar age, and I think Lauren Downs better. But Maddie Green's got a BBL, women's BBL gig this summer. She's had multiple BBL, women's Big Bash League gigs as well. So it's just interesting to keep an eye on. And that's also why Georgia Plummer batting up the order is interesting. Like, for the White Ferns to get better, other players have to score runs just to help out, you know. And this is what we were talking about with the football, the All Whites, and then what we've discussed with the football Ferns as well. There is a weakness to a team if your role players are predominantly inexperienced. If you can get your role players to be certified at whatever level of sport this team is operating at, if it's international, they need to have 10, 20 internationals to their name. If it's an NRL team, you want your role players to be 100 gamers who are just settled with the grind of whatever that, like NRL or whatever other sport it is. And if some of these White Ferns role players, Lauren Down, Maddie Green, Georgia Plymouth, if they can just get into an experienced groove, and just like even other players like Hannah Rowe, bowlers, Rosemary Mayer, Claudia Green, Jess Kerr, you just want those players to have experience so that they can do something when they need to. If you're calling on young players to do something when they need to do it, you're probably going to lose because they're not going to do it. And then you just start this cycle of then that player's dropped and another young player comes in and they can't do the job, and just flows on from there. So for winning and winning championships, your role players have to be well drilled in the art of role playing, and that requires a bit of experience. Which takes us to, let's do Joseph Parker and the boxing here wildcard. No role players in these sports because it's all individual mahi. But we don't need to elaborate on this too much. But I am curious, just to set the scene, because I was thinking like Joseph Parker just suffered a defeat, and Junior Fa has been sliding a wee bit as well. He lost to Joseph Parker, and then he kind of fell out of the heavyweight boxing mix. Thankfully, David Naik is on the rise. And City Kickboxing boxing department also has Hemi Ahio, and is there another one at the City Kickboxing boxing stable?
I'm sure there's a few more, but Hemi Ahio is the only one who's at this kind of level at this point. Or probably not even at that level, but trying to put his hand up to say, I deserve to be at that level kind of thing, like working his way up towards it, climbing the ladder, you know? Everyone else would be just three or like, you know, a fair bit further down that ladder, but you know, these things can happen quickly, you never know.
And that falls on in front of the backdrop of UFC 281, which will be held at Madison Square Garden, where you got Israel Adesanya fighting Alex Pereira. This is a big yarn because Alex Pereira defeated Adesanya twice in kickboxing. Then he entered the UFC, and he's just smoked a few opponents to get this matchup against Adesanya. Also on this card, you got Dan Hooker, Brad Riddell, and Carlos Ulberg. So I kind of feel wildcard. Joseph Parker and Junior Fa have just encountered some adversity. Let's be generous and say they've hit the plateau of, you know, their boxing careers right now. There is Hemi Ahio and David Naika rising, and meanwhile you've got a massive UFC 281 card coming up, which is in November. What about that whole situation, the combat sports realm in Aotearoa, intrigues you the most?
Yeah, well, I was just thinking, because I haven't heard a lot from Junior Fa in a long time. Should check and see if he's done any more vlogs on the old YouTube or anything. I haven't I haven't seen anything pop up, and I haven't thought to search it out. But the last I remember was after he had lost to Lucas Brown, and he was kind of like, they did say straight away, like, we're going to put in a complaint because of the rabbit punches, the sort of behind the air shots, which they were both knockdowns kind of were a bit, I mean, he got wrecked and he let his guard down and just got this, what happens against the top guy like Lucas Brown, who has fought against some extremely good opponents in the past. Like, this isn't to excuse it, but there was slightly, there's sort of a bit of question marks about the legality of the actual knockdown punches themselves. Never heard a word about that afterwards. It's been months, never heard a word. So I'm guessing that they didn't win that appeal, which I didn't think they would. But, I haven't heard anything about what Junior Farm might be doing next or whatever. I expect he's just taken a good long break after that. And it's hard to see where he does go from this, because it's not like he's even got at least Joseph Parker after a big defeat like that to Joe Joyce. He can say, well, Joe Joyce might be one of the 5 best heavyweights in the world. Like, he was unproven. We didn't really know this coming into the Parker fight. If Joyce goes on and beats a couple other people in a similar fashion, Parker looks a little bit better in comparison. You say, well, I'm not alone in getting smoked by this guy. I might still be top 10. I'm just not quite on that level. And he's a well-known name who's fought some good guys in the past. Junior Fa doesn't have that. His biggest fight, and the only time I think he's ever headlined, he might have been co-headlined in the Brown fight. I'm not sure how that worked out, but he wasn't the poster thing. That was Kambosos Haney, was the sort of unification title bout, whatever. Like, that's what was selling the tickets, not Brown versus Fa. So that doesn't really count. The only time he was the headliner was against Joseph Parker, and that was very much an Aotearoa kind of spectacle. And I don't know it would have got too much coverage outside of this country. He doesn't have the name recognition to be able to sort of use that into getting other fights. So I think both of them are in tricky places where, in Parker's spot, it's kind of out of his control unless he just wants to be like a gatekeeper type. You want to get yourself up the rankings, you fight me, and then you fight the contender, and then you fight the champion, sort of thing. Like, just a step along the ladder for other fighters, which isn't great for himself. It's not really where he wants to be. And Junior Fa, I think he's in a real difficult place. Like, there's a reason we haven't heard much about the future of his career, is because it's hard to think what that might be after that. So that's tough. But we do have the Kambosos Haney rematch coming up in, was it this weekend or the weekend? I think it might be the weekend after. David Naker, Hemiahio, Junior Fa all fought on the undercard of it last time. Well, the upper undercard on the main event, but lower down slightly. Junior Fa obviously not involved this time around. I don't think he would have got a phone call. But David Naker and Hemiahio both are getting their next professional fights are going to be there, and it's good publicity. It's good exposure for both of them. Likely to be fighting. It was one of those ones where it's named. They might have named who they're fighting by now, but I haven't checked in the last week or so. Definitely when it was announced, it was like against unnamed opponents, which means someone they're going to beat. Generally how that goes. Unnamed opponent means easy win, but it means easy win where you get to show off for the cameras and get seen and build up your record. Hemiahio is still undefeated. David Nika obviously as well, because he's only had about 3 fights. Nika currently cruiserweight. I do think he has the capabilities of stepping up into a heavyweight division down the line, but probably not till he's established at cruiserweight. Hemiahio definitely heavyweight, short in stature for a heavyweight, but he is a heavyweight. And yeah, both of them should get good opportunities to hopefully, knock a bugger out on in the next fights and work their way up. We're stepping back. We don't have like Joseph Parker at the moment is no longer potentially 1 or 2 fights away from another title challenge. We're not in that realm anymore. But Nika and Ahio are both on the rise, and I guess that's where the focus ought to go for boxing at the moment.
On the rise and into the football Ferns squad is Alyssa Winham.
Yeah, she is.
You've mentioned her talents and her ability on a football field a few times, Wildcard. I'm interested, just maybe to tie it in with the National League stuff, you can talk about the football Fern squad and the National League separately, but there is some crossover with this question. Was Alyssa Winham in the National League recently?
Well, she was named in that Canterbury squad, and when I saw that, I was like, did they just use this, like, forget to change something from the graphic last year, and it's an accident or what? Because it seems like a bit of a surprise when she's. I have seen two of last year's Phoenix players have played in the National League so far. Kelly Brown's come off the bench twice for Northern Rovers, and Charlotte Lancaster played on the weekend in the game behind me on the YouTube thing. Came off the bench for Central Football, probably because they don't currently have contracts with the Phoenix and maybe aren't going to get contracts with the Phoenix. So that might be why. Alyssa Winham does have a contract with the Phoenix. In fact, she's the only player contracted beyond this season with the Phoenix. She's got a 2-year contract. Hasn't yet played for Canterbury. Kind of don't expect her to at this point. I'm not really sure why she was on the list, but she hasn't played yet.
So you're talking Alyssa Winham was in the Canterbury team, like squad list to start this current season. My question in my mind was asking about previous seasons.
Right.
Has she been like a leading figure in the Women's National League in previous seasons?
Well, that's where this gets interesting because you know that story about how like she wasn't initially signed and then they found out they could get scholarship players and then she was added as a scholarship player and ended up being one of their better players throughout that first season, that kind of yarn. And you get people being like, well, how was she overlooked to start with? And I'm like, well, pretty easily, because the first time I saw her play was for Canterbury United Pride and saw her play several times that season. I watched all those games. So if she played, I saw it. And I remember seeing her, she would have been 16 or 17 playing in that team. This was the year, I think the year before the year before. So 2020 season. And she looked good. She looked clearly a tidy, technical, skillful player, someone who could like drop into pockets, collect the ball. She also looked very small. And I remember thinking like there's a talented player there in a couple of years' time. So I'm not surprised she wasn't seen as like an initial thing. I was shocked by how well she took to the A-League thing. I was maybe just one of those things where the bigger field, just a little bit more space, and she thrives. And a couple years older as well also helps too. So there's that. But there's also been a push to get her into the the football Ferns as quickly as possible. And this is she could have been called up for several squads leading up to this point. I kind of like the fact that they've taken their time with it. She is a young player. The rise was pretty sudden to getting to the Phoenix, to becoming a Phoenix, every game starter type player. You sort of like got the feeling that during that Phoenix season, they were just like, well, let's let her finish her first professional season so far. Like, let's not add anything else to the agenda and just complicate things. But let's let her finish the Phoenix season, right? Phoenix season finishes, under 20 World Cup coming up, where she's going to be a star player. Well, let's not rush things any further. Let her do that first. That's done. She's re-signed with the Phoenix. Now is a good time to get her in, because you also don't want to leave it too late if you think she might be a factor at the World Cup next year. But you don't want to rush her in and complicate things and to the potential detriment of like her form or performances. I think they've got the timing pretty nice. I might be on the more conservative side of this, but I think it's worked out pretty nicely. And you do have to be careful with young sports people in general. When everything happens so quickly, it can be kind of like, I think someone we mentioned earlier, Amelia Kerr is probably a good example of this. A bit different because like from the age of 14, she was a no-doubter. She's going to play for the White Ferns one day. But also by the age of 20, she'd had a mental health break from the sport and just been like, I need to take some time out. Like when she was 18, she was seen as like a key player for the national team. That's a lot to put on an 18-year-old shoulders kind of thing. So I think there's been a bit of caution in dealing with Alyssa Winham to this point. And I think that's been the right way to do it. And the timing's pretty nicely. Hopefully she gets the debut against Japan and goes pretty well.
What's her greatest strength as a footballer, and just tell us a bit about how she plays her football, what position, what she's good at, etc.
Generally, a number 10 type, central attacking midfielder styles. really skillful, like great touch. She can beat defenders. One of those ones who'll just do like a sneaky turn and suddenly you're gone. Also, pretty good. Like the vision's really good too. She's someone who can spot a good pass. You see a run and get the ball to that person. Almost to because there was the story when she scored her first A-League goal, and there was like she had one of the things where they like write a message on the wristband kind of thing, and it said shoot, and it was like reminding herself you can shoot too. Like you don't have to pass every time. Like, but it sometimes has been seen as someone who's maybe a little bit too selfless, and trying to set others up, where sometimes a better option is just like pull the trigger yourself. So like this is all normal for a player, a young player figuring out their game kind of thing. But she has a skill set in terms of being someone who can beat a player, who can operate in between the lines, who can thread passes and stuff. She is like a the profile of her as a player is something that the football Ferns don't really have right now. They don't have someone who can do specifically what she does. So while she's young, while she's inexperienced, she also might be kind of like, if not a necessary option, at least like a really valuable variation upon how they have been playing. And this is a team that needs creativity, that struggled to score goals. That's the key. She's someone who can maybe supply a bit more of that. So, that's the thinking there.
Smells a little bit like Sarpreet Singh, and Sarpreet Singh smells a bit like
I genuinely thought of comparing them. When you said that, I was thinking I was going to say the Sarpreet Singh comparison. I think there is a bit of that. Sarpreet Singh, left-footed, maybe a little bit more direct. That has a long shot that Winham doesn't have. But definitely similar players, similar style of players in a couple of reasons. Similar in how they play, and also similar in that they're kind of got unique skill sets for Kiwi footballers. And we saw how valuable Sarpreet Singh was in the All Whites game on the weekend when he wasn't there. The absence makes the heart grow fonder kind of idea. We saw what they were missing when they didn't have him. Maybe Alyssa Winham can do the flip side of that and be like, we didn't know what we were missing until suddenly she was playing and setting up goals and stuff. So that's the best case scenario. We'll see how it goes.
I believe the men's national league is also starting this weekend. So we've got both football national leagues underway in Aotearoa. Women's rolls on, lots of female coverage there. Team of the week in every Monday email. Is you got your blokes preview up now as well. Is there one player or one idea that stands out to you that you need to share? You need to get it off your chest. You need to express this with Aotearoa football fans straight from the horse's mouth instead of the fingertips typing it up on the blogs. What says you about the men's National League football campaign?
Campaign's a good word. Campaign's a word I often use. It's one of those ones where you're writing an article about football and you need to find other ways to say season. And especially because some of them cross over, you can't always say year. Some you can, but like some you can't say year if it's the 22-23 season kind of thing, because it's happening over 2 years.
It's either
campaign, term is a good one as well.
Year, campaign, because most of them aren't tournaments. If it's a tournament, you can type up tournament, but campaign, season, or year usually.
Yeah, tournament sometimes becomes 20 as well, or competition. League is a good one if it's a league competition, but not all the football ones are. So, sports writer insider chat there. I would say, yeah, it's one big note on the men's national league. I like it's a pity that Auckland City lost their last Northern League game, because I think it would have been extremely cool as a sort of narrative coming into the season if they were still undefeated for the entirety of the year 2022. It is a yearly thing, so I can use it this time, and across all competitions. Up until that point, they had only drawn one game. It was the Hamilton Wanderers really early on. They'd won every other game in every other competition, won the Northern League, won the OFC Champions League, won the Chatham Cup. They're going for a quadruple in the National League now. It would be even cooler if there was also like an undefeated streak to go by, because then every week it would be like is this team going to beat Auckland City? Like every game would have that extra sort of hype upon it. They lost their last Northern League game a week before the Chatham Cup, maybe just taking the eye off the ball a little bit. So that's not the case, but it still is a thing. Like, who can beat Auckland City?
So your biggest thing is something that won't happen.
It's still the biggest thing, but it's not as cool because of the thing that won't happen. Like, it's still a matter of like, who can beat Auckland City? Are they the best team in the country? Do they have the mentality kings kind of thing going on to continue to win all these games and whatever? Can other teams good enough to take them down when Auckland City turn up and play well? Like, this is still a factor every week, but it would be slightly more of a factor if they were still undefeated. Just add a little bit of juice. There are a couple of teams that haven't played at this level as well, which is also quite interesting because, like, Auckland City obviously operated as a premiership club, as a franchise type club as well back in the day. Team Wellington pretty much split things down the middle into Miramar Rangers, Wellington Olympics. So they're both there. A lot of players who've all played at this level, plus they had the South Central Series thing last year. Napier City Rovers are basically, like, a lot of their dudes were just the old Hawke's Bay United types. Birkenhead provided the bulk of the players for Waikato United down the line there. It's last sort of couple premiership seasons. So a lot of those kind of close connections where it's like they might be a different team, but they're kind of similar themes, similar ideas, similar faces to what we've seen in previous National League seasons. But Melville United are a fresh one upon the scene. So they're quite exciting. I already mentioned at the start how they're representing the Waikato region, the only National League team. Auckland United are another one, a merger club between Three Kings and Onehunga Sports that's been around a couple of years. The only club to have qualified for both the men's and the women's National Leagues. So there's that. They're the Kate Shepherd Cup champions as well. And Christchurch United is the other one. Like, teams like Christchurch United and Melville are old clubs, so they've played in other versions of the National League in the past, and you'll see them saying things like, it's our first time in the National League since 1992 or whatever. It's like, well, I don't remember that, so I obviously don't particularly care about whatever that version of the National League. I'm just looking at what it is now. They are new on the scene, and Christchurch United are a pretty interesting team because they're coached by Paul Eiffel. They've got quite a few very, like, Noah Billingsley plays for them as one of those guys who I think a lot of people are going to see them in week one and be like, that guy, where's he been? And they're owned by a Russian, I don't know if he's a Russian billionaire. He might only be a Russian millionaire. I'm not sure, but a very rich Russian fellow runs the club. He's like the CEO and has helped fund big academy there and new football facilities, probably paying Paul Eiffel's salary out of his pocket. It's not quite Roman Abramovich, early 2000s Chelsea, but it's the grassroots Aotearoa football version of that.
I always try to do this. Always try to rein you in and just confine the answer. And it's a futile task. Like, every time I say, just give me a name, in my mind, I realize, why am I so dumb? Why do I always pose this within? Because I don't get the response I want, but it's my fault. So I'm going to do the same thing again, just for shits and giggles. Who is the best men's player ahead of the season that you're thinking about?
That might be too hard to answer before seeing anything.
Just give me a name, just tell me someone.
Cam Howison was picked in the All White squad, so I think he's a pretty good shout. Yeah, he's always one of the best on the field for Auckland City.
The woman, now that you've seen a game or two.
Well, based on the first two games, very hard to go past Taylor O'Brien of Eastern Suburbs, who's playing in midfield. So already doing a great job as a midfielder, sort of patrolling the central area, dishing that ball around, winning interceptions, keeping her team on the attack. Also ghosting into the penalty area and being a threat off set pieces. So she scored 4 goals in the first game from midfield, scored 3 goals in their second game from midfield. She has 7 goals in 2 games. I think, off the top of my head here, I think one of 3 players who made my team of the week in both the first 2 rounds. I think Millie Clegg was another and Lily Jervis was the other. I think that's right. There might be a 4th I'm missing, but I think they're the only 3 who did that. So, and the way she's scoring and likelihood to be in team of the week, many more times if that continues.
Let's swing into our NRL Grand Final preview where we've got the Panthers versus Eels. Panthers have named Moses Leota and James Fisher-Harris as their starting prop duo. They both started in last year's Grand Final as well. So now we've got two starting props from Aotearoa for the Penrith Panthers. Of course, Moses Leota is Samoan, and I can't really find concrete information about his grassroots connection to footy in Auckland. But he left Auckland and moved to Sydney by himself, which I just think is quite inspirational, given that he just made everything on his own in Sydney. Established himself in the Panthers system and just climbed up their ranks. I don't want to speak too soon, Wildcard, but someone like Moses Leota, there does seem to be a difference between Samoans in Australia and Samoans in Aotearoa, the Usos. Because every Samoan in Australia is opting to represent Samoa over Australia. I don't want to speak too
Jerome
soon.
Luai,
the
Mays,
Crichton,
Milford,
basically
Papali'i, yeah.
And so everyone in Australia is like, oh, Samoa's going to be awesome. But when I look at the Kiwis, and again, don't want to speak too soon because Kiwis are in a very different position to the 2017 World Cup, which is a shambles under David Kidwell, and that featured a very last-minute shift from players out from the Kiwis back to Tonga. So I don't want to speak too soon, but when people fantasize about a Samoan lineup, they chuck up Isaiah Papali'i, Ken Mamalo, Asafa Solomona, Moses Leota. But all those dudes seem to be pretty chuffed with Aotearoa Kiwis. So I do want to throw that out there. I don't know what this means. I'm not like embedded. I'm half Pākehā, half Palangi, so I'm not like intertwined in the politics or the what goes into making this decision. But I have noticed Samoans from Aotearoa seem fairly willing to represent Aotearoa Kiwis, where the Samoans from Australia, they want to represent Samoa. Obviously, someone like Braden Hamlin-Uele probably not going to be in the Kiwis squad, so then he shows up for Samoa. But the best Samoan players seem to want to represent Aotearoa Kiwis, which I just find interesting. I don't know what it means, but it is a trend and theme that I'm pondering. So shout out Moses Leota. He is a fantastic prop. Seems to be good buddies with Fisher-Harris. Perhaps that's some Aotearoa connection as well. And most of his Aiga are in Auckland, I believe, as well. Like they had a big turnout for that test at Mount Smart Stadium. Eels, they have Dylan Brown. You got a bit of Isaiah Papali'i on one edge, right edge, and Maratini Okore is on the bench. Shout out Bailey Simonson. Played his first game at centre last week and did fairly well. He's back at centre this week, and that means no Niokore at centre, which is good for the Eels forward pack, I believe. The interesting thing that's happened here, Wildcard, last week, Bryce Cartwright was on the bench, despite barely playing most of the season. This week, Nathan Brown is on the bench, despite barely playing the season. And the dude who played all season is Makahisi Makatoa from New Plymouth. And he missed out last week to make way for Bryce Cartwright. And now he's not on the bench to make way for Nathan Brown. Hopefully there's some shenanigans here and Makatoa plays because he did fantastic all season long. And he was the dude off the bench adding that oomph all season long. But come finals footy, he's dropping out of the team, which is a bummer. Especially he will play for Cook Islands at the World Cup. He's from New Plymouth. You know, there's some funky wrinkles there that I would have liked to see continue, but wasn't to be. Eels also have Ofahiki Ogden on their bench, on their extended bench with Makatoa. You can jump in there with any points, Wildcard, but I do want to get into some wider Kiwi-NRL breakdowns of these two clubs. But just with the grand final in particular, what kind of stands out from the Kiwi-NRL perspective?
Well, just first, I was looking at the Samoan World Cup squad because I had seen it yesterday when I was scrolling through, and it's like lot of Panthers in there. And I got to imagine that sort of Panthers brotherhood is also a big part of that. It's just all those dudes are like, we can all play together if we play for Samoa, you know. But in terms of I mean, quite a few of those guys probably are also eligible for New Zealand, but it's like, you know, guys like Marty Tapau, who are on the other side of it, kind of thing.
So that's an
Say
interesting
Chanel
one.
Harris Tavita might be the only one who
I think they have Manu Brown from Christchurch. He's had a
he is.
career
Yep.
resurgence. Him being in a World Cup is epic with what his last few years have been like. Kalma Tuolangi's another one. But Marty Tapau, he made a big... Josh Alawai's another one. He seems pretty hearty. Given some of his views on life, he... You know, he can represent Samoa. But Marty Tapau was an interesting one because at the time it was thrown up as like following on from the Tongan stuff, like Jason Taumalolo and those dudes moving. So they moved, and then Marty Tapau was like, yeah, I'm the man as well. I'm going to change Samoa football. But it's more like you're just not good enough for the Kiwis. So now it's timely, right? Like now it's just convenient. With the thing about Taumalolo, Tokiaho, Saliva Havili, David Fusatua, is they were and might be able to, depending on what's like how you view things. They're all capable. At the time, they were all in a top tier Kiwis team. So that's kind of the difference.
Still are. Yeah, well, that is a big difference. Let's see where do we go with the grand final stuff? Well, I asked you for a prediction on the variety show on Tuesday, and you broke down the Penrith Panthers' likelihood of going back to back, which I think is you're a brave man to bet against them at this point. Like the Panthers have been the best team all season. They've been the most consistent team all season as well, where other top teams, I think the Cowboys didn't start so flash. Sharks have been relatively consistent, but they weren't expected necessarily to be up as high as they were. Same with the Cowboys. Teams like the Storm and Roosters had just, sometimes injury enforced, but that happens during the case of the season, like just month-long dips where they just weren't themselves, and that sort of flowed on into the finals where they both were eliminated relatively early. The Panthers have just run the show from start to finish, like pillar to post. I don't know if you think they've got better since last year, but they certainly haven't gotten any worse. And other teams, there's just been sort of a reshuffling of the deck beneath them. Whereas last year it was a lot of Panthers and Storm kind of like bossing the show the whole way. There's not really that head-to-head thing going on anymore. Like the Panthers have kind of put distance between themselves and the rest of the pack. So it would be a big upset if the Eels can get over them. Do you see ways in which the Eels can, though? Like, is there a pathway to spring an upset in this grand final for Parramatta? I will say one thing. The last time I saw a great stat. The last time that the Parramatta Eels won the premiership, they've made a few finals since then, as anyone who's watched the various Nathan Hindmarsh shows knows, because gets reminded about losing them all the time. But the last time they won a premiership was the year that the movie Top Gun was released. And I don't know if you know, I haven't seen it myself, but I've been told by other people it's quite good. Long-awaited Top Gun sequel came out earlier this year. So maybe there's a little bit of Tom Cruise alignment there. He might just be a big Eels fan. I'm not sure. The Bunnies have got Russell Crowe and the Eels can have Tom Cruise. But if you're looking for some kind of weird synchronicity, there might be one. I'm sure you've got something more tangible as to why they might win, though.
You're asking more of what is the Eels' path to victory? Because in my mind, like I'm thinking, like, yeah, Sean Lane's fantastic, but the Panthers have Liam Martin and Viliami Kikau, who are both defensive monsters, right? Like, yeah, Bailey Simonson was impressive at center. I think he was marking Peter Hiku last week. The Panthers will isolate him.
Yeah.
So it's like Coruscant's better dummy half than Reed Mahoney. For some reason, Australians say Mahoney as Marnie, which
Yeah. Marnie rhymes with Barney, sort of.
all complicates the Australian pronunciations further. Like if you guys are pronouncing words that are spelt one way and you're pronouncing them a completely different way, what are we supposed to make of how you pronounce Polynesian names? You know, like you can barely, yeah.
I'm
So
guessing
like,
Marnie is like an Irish
yeah,
pronunciation or
who cares?
something.
Who
But
cares?
if you can get the Irish one right, why not try a little harder on the Tongan ones?
I think Dylan Brown is a better version of Clint Gutherson. Like they are the same fullback. I view them as like they do. They're not a Roger Tuivasa-Sheck fullback, but what do? They win games as fullbacks, right? Like they're not a Reece Walsh type of fullback, but they win games at fullback. They're not Jaden Campbell as a fullback, but they win games. And that's because they don't make errors, they're mopping everything up, and they're always in support. And those are just some key fundamentals. Like they might not be throwing 10 try assists. Like a lot of the pizzazz and the flashy skills might not be there, but they're always there. They're the fittest players in their team. They don't make mistakes. They're mopping everything up. And when they do need to be there in support, they're always there. But I think Dylan Edwards is just a bit better than Gutherson. So all of this, like the Eels are a very powerful forward pack. The Panthers are the most powerful forward pack. The Eels are very aggressive. The Panthers are the most aggressive team. Like that's just kind of how I'm viewing this grand final matchup. The Eels to win, everything has to go right, and that could happen. Like they might be able to ruffle some feathers. They might have some tactics. Very interested to see how Dylan Brown performs, especially his matchup against Jerome Luai, former junior Kiwis captain Jerome Luai. Never been to Aotearoa, to the best of my knowledge, but shout out to him. I think he has
Not even to play the Warriors, I wouldn't imagine, based on the last couple of
he
years.
might have done that.
It might have snuck in it early on.
Yeah. I think he's got a Māori mother and a Samoan father, so that's the connection there. You could make a case that Dylan Brown is better than Jerome Luai. I don't know if many people would view it that way because Jerome Luai is like the perfect complementary partner to Nathan Cleary. So that it's not that it looks better, the complete package is better than Brown and Moses. But I think Brown, what he does, like, and this is going to be the interesting thing at the World Cup wildcard, is how some of these other players perform for different nations, because it's not always a guaranteed that you want to represent Samoa or Tonga, or you would rather represent Aotearoa than Samoa, whatever it is. It's not a guarantee that you're going to have a fantastic World Cup based on your decision. And I think Dylan Brown's the type of player where this matchup is going to be fascinating right now against Jerome Luai. It's also going to be fascinating at the World Cup because they're both going to be playing 6 for their respective nations, which is very interesting. Yeah, it's just a good game of footy. Like the Eels can definitely win. I just think the Panthers are better. And to take us into a deeper breakdown of each club wildcard, the Panthers this year, they won SG Ball, which is under 18s. Might be under 19s if they change that age bracket. They won Jersey Flegg. So SG Ball was earlier this year. Jersey Flegg and New South Wales Cup were both last weekend. Panthers won both of them. So the Panthers have won under 18, under 19 SG Ball in New South Wales, Jersey Flegg, and reserve grade New South Wales Cup. And they are chasing back-to-back titles in the NRL, which is also their 3rd grand final in a row. That is pure excellence. It's disgusting how excellent the Panthers system is. And we've had a giggle about like catchment areas and how NRL clubs, like, there is this myth about the local area, your junior system, and where players are recruited from, because the biggest myth in NRL is that NRL clubs depend on their old school catchment area based on the 1980s. No, every NRL club views Aotearoa as their catchment area. Like, every NRL club is recruiting from around Australia, let alone Aotearoa as well. I'm a big believer in that idea. I think I invented that idea, like, that's how much I believe in it. However, the Panthers do the best job of balancing the actual catchment area with the myth of the catchment area. To the best of my knowledge, the only players in the Panthers 17 who aren't local juniors, you've got korero, Viliami Kikau, I think, came through the Cowboys, and maybe Scott Sorensen came from the Sharks recently, and Jamin Salmon. So that's 13 players that are from the Panthers system. Take out James Fisher-Harris, and the rest of them are from the wider Penrith catchment area. And that is, as we've talked about, when you're managing a salary cap, having local players from your system is an efficiency, because they're all on their first few NRL contracts, and then when someone gets too big, in the nicest possible way, and they want more money, what is Viliami Kikau doing? He's taking more money at the Bulldogs. Korero, what's he doing? Taking more money at the Tigers. What do the Panthers do? They replace them with a cheaper player from their own system. Brian To'o, I think Stephen Crichton might have played wing in one of the grand finals. And then suddenly Taylor May appears. He is a local junior on his first NRL contract, and he played most of the games on the wing for the Panthers this season. So the Panthers being able to rely on local juniors is a huge benefit to their salary cap, because all those players are cheaper, they develop them, they boost their value, they demand more money, and the Panthers can invest in the players they want to. Fisher-Harris, Nathan Cleary, Dylan Edwards, Isaiah Yeo, those type of characters. And also, they can replace the players who leave with far cheaper players. Like, the Panthers may replace Viliami Kikau. They won't do this, but Preston Ricky from Northland has been a starting edge forward for the Panthers New South Wales Cup team all season. So next season, in some way, shape, or form, Ricky might get game time as an edge forward, which means the Panthers have gone from, like, Kikau might be commanding 800, 900, 700K at the Bulldogs. The Panthers aren't paying that. They're paying 100K to a player who might absorb that loss. Yeah, sure, Scott Sorensen might come on and play edge forward, but the spaces that open up are going to be taken by a cheaper player from within the Panthers system. And that system is full of local juniors, as well as players from the Warriors. And this is the funniest thing.
The Warriors, you say?
Yeah. Like Fisher-Harris and Leota, big Donnies, they're not from the Warriors. Fisher-Harris, excellent recruitment from the Panthers. For some reason, Preston Ricky was playing for Redcliffe Queensland Cup last season. William Whakatomafe Otahu Jr., he played for Ricky and Whakatomafe both played for the Warriors flag before the pandemic. After the pandemic, Ricky went to Redcliffe reserve grade, and Whakatomafe went to Redcliffe under 21s as Warriors players. Deion Amatuanai played SG ball for the Warriors. Then he moved to Redcliffe after the pandemic as a Warriors player, and he's playing Redcliffe under 21s. All three of them went to the Panthers for this season. Ricky played all season in New South Wales Cup. Amatuanai played most of the season in Jersey Flag. Also played a few games for New South Wales Cup. So what did I just say about the Panthers developing players, cheaper players, production line? Amatuanai played most of the season in Flegg, was promoted to New South Wales Cup. It's easy to see what the next step is for him. Next season, playing mostly New South Wales Cup, might get a few NRL games on the wing because you just need someone to do the job who's cheap. He might be that guy. Like, I kind of framed it as having a giggle at the Warriors' expense, but it's more just an example of how the pandemic impacted the Warriors. Because those players were all surplus to the amount of spots the Warriors had available with Redcliffe. Panthers pounced on them, they recruited them, put them in a good system. They all won something this year, right? Like, they won the Jersey Flegg. Whakatamafe was playing centre, Amatuana was playing on the wing for Flegg, Preston Ricky was an edge forward, New South Wales Cup. Panthers Flegg also had a guy, Eli Tuia, who's from Wellington. He's a Randwick junior. He went to school in Ipswich, and then the Panthers recruited him from Ipswich State High School, I believe. So he's another player. And there's a Northland wrinkle throughout this wildcard because in SG Ball, there was Kyson Kingy, who was from Kerikeri, and he played some future Warriors fixtures. He moved down from Kerikeri. He went to school at Mags for a year or two as part of the Warriors system. So he played SG Ball. Another guy, Isaiah Katoa, has been signed by the Redcliffe Dolphins, not the Warriors Dolphins, but the actual Redcliffe Dolphins. He is the younger brother of Sione Katoa, who used to play for the Panthers, and he's from Wellington. So Isaiah Katoa is from Wellington, moved to Sydney when his brother moved to Sydney, and I think he came up through the Panthers system. He's also loosely affiliated with Aotearoa through that connection with Wellington. No concrete information there, but he started with SG Ball. Redcliffe recruited him, and then it was a bit of a kerfuffle from the Panthers end, like, why are you poaching our juniors? Even though the Panthers have poached juniors, like, respect, it happens to everyone, but you can't cry foul about it if you're also doing it, that's a bit weird. But Isaiah Katoa started at halfback for the Jersey Flegg final, so that's fantastic. There is players from Aotearoa at every single level of a dominant Panthers organisation. SG Ball, Jersey Flegg, New South Wales Cup, and NRL. Eels, on the other hand, there's not much coming from within the Eels system. But that's all good, because at the NRL level, Dylan Brown, he's from Northland. Bailey Simonson was recruited from the Raiders. Marata Niokore, Isaiah Papali'i, both recruited from the Warriors. Makatoa, bit of a journeyman. Been a bunch of different clubs. Hayes Dunster's come up through the Eels system. He suffered a knee injury earlier this year, didn't play the season. So the weird thing about this crop wildcard is that, I don't know, there's all this noise about Brad Arthur as a coach. It's like every Kiwi NRL player at the Eels gets better. So what's wrong with the coach? Like, Isaiah Papali'i went from being a mediocre rugby league player to an absolute elite player. Niokore, good at the Warriors. Now he's an international. Like, you go to the Eels to double your value. That's literally what Papali'i and Niokore did. So I just find that idea a bit weird. Like, Brad Arthur, to me, looks like a fantastic coach because everyone who goes there gets better. And this also applies to the New South Wales Cup level. Offa Hiki Ogden, Eels signed him from the Bulldogs. Wiramu Greg, also from Whangarei. Eels signed him from the Cowboys. Hayes Perham, Rotorua, Bay of Plenty region. Eels signed him from the Warriors. Jersey Flegg, Moala Graham Taufa, he's from Auckland. Eels signed him from the Roosters. Like, Ogden, Greg, Perham, Graham Taufa, all those signings happened in the last 12 months from other NRL clubs. So it's very different to what the Panthers are doing, right? But all these players should be going to the Eels because that is where you double your value. That is where you win games and you get better. You become a better player as part of a winning team. So that's the differing vibes between these two teams and organizations. And obviously the Eels system, they're not winning everything like the Panthers. But what they are doing is at their NRL level and Jersey Flegg level, they are making good Kiwi NRL signings of players who get better. And based on what Papali'i and Neil Corey have done in boosting their value, I believe their places will just be taken by Ofahiki Ogden and Wiremu Greg next season.
That's like that's a nice little what would you call it? The cycle of Kiwi NRL, isn't it? Like you go and build, like, yeah, sort of recruited from various places. It happens all over. Like you're signed up for the junior grades at a various NRL club. You work your way up. You maybe break through at that club, as has been happening at the Panthers, or maybe you move to a team like the Eels, get your breakthrough there. As a Papali'i, turn yourself into like back row of the year caliber type, sign a big contract somewhere else, and then the spot you leave at that team gets replaced by just another dude who's just a few, like, somewhere out. Like if you think about the cycle as a clock, like you've reached 12 o'clock, someone else is at 6 o'clock, it's their turn now, kind of thing. It's the cycle of Kiwi NRL.
It is weird because everything I said about the Eels is in direct contrast to what they did with Dylan Brown. Like, the Eels recruited Dylan Brown from Northern Swords, Northland Rugby League, and he was instantly successful in the Eels system. Everyone else was signed from other NRL clubs. And even in that Northern Swords team, I think Dylan Brown has said this himself, and you look at the awards and the merit teams from that tournament, Paul Turner was the star player for Northern Swords. Yet the Eels recruited Dylan Brown, they brought him over to Sydney, and he's winning. I don't know if he won SG Ball, he might have, but he won multiple like age group championships as an Eels player, made Australian schoolboys, and made his NRL debut as an 18-year-old, where he became one of the best running tackling halves in the NRL with it, like by the age of 21, maybe 20. That is amazing Kiwi NRL scouting and recruitment and development. Everyone else there has come from other NRL clubs. So it's a bit weird, but I do love what the Eels are doing. But they don't have the same system as the Panthers. But for Kiwi NRL players, it is a fantastic place to go, as long as Brad Arthur's coach.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's just taken them to a grand final, so one way or another, you'd imagine his job is safe. You sort of need both, though, don't you? Like, you need the Panthers style. No one is going to be as successful as the Panthers. Like, if they win four age grades from like under 18s all the way up to first grade in the same year, I'd imagine that's probably unprecedented. If it's not unprecedented, then I can't think it's happened so many times before. But also, like, a lot of dudes do get, like, the example you gave earlier of Isaiah Papali'i at the Warriors. You just think where his career was at that point. He's not going to the Panthers at that stage. Like, the Panthers, as you said, are this really efficient production line, basically, of being able to develop internally. They're not going to sign a guy who's running a risk of becoming a little bit of a journeyman in his mid-20s kind of thing because he hasn't kicked on at a bad team. The Eels sign him. We know what happens next. You need a team like that's good. Like, the Panthers model is probably the ideal one because of the reasons you said about how it just absolutely games the salary cap if you can develop your own superstar players. It's everything is so much cheaper. You can, like, nothing's more expensive than having to buy an established free agent. Those are the most expensive players. And some teams need to do that because they need to change things around. But other teams, if you can bring it in from within, like it's so much better. But you also obviously like the potential was there for someone like Papali'i. He just needed that second chance in a new, fresh environment. The Eels gave him that fresh environment. Like not every team can operate like the Panthers, but you still need teams who can operate like the Eels. And here we are, end of the season. They're both in the grand final, right? So it works one way or another.
Mad respect, Papali'i was one of the best first 15 players while at Mags, and he also made his NRL debut as maybe an 18-year-old. So he's been a monster as far as pedigree goes, like what he was up to as a teenager. It just took something like going over to the Eels to get that out of him. And while we're here, wildcard, pour some out, light one up for Nate Roach, because he and Papali'i went to the Eels at the same time. Unfortunately, Nate Roach, I believe, just suffered too many injuries and dipped out of professional rugby league. And Papali'i is keeping that flame burning for his homie as well. So shout out Nate Roach, whatever you're up to. Made the move with Papali'i, didn't quite work out. Big it up to yourself for listening to the Niche Cast. Big it up to yourself if you love Aotearoa in all its overcast glory. Kia kaha. Stay beautiful. Mauri ora and chit